Wonderful. All right, well, I shall waste no time because we're on a tight timetable and I have been told very strictly that I must stick to it so that we can all get to lunch on time. Now, this session is entitled Science in the World because despite the fact that we are all gripped with the Brexit vote and the situation in Europe and our own relationship with it, we must be focused as well on the image that we project out into the wider science community and exactly how our relations are going to be affected there. I am not going to talk because I am surrounded by people who can speak about this far more effectively and eloquently and more informed than I can. And I would like to turn first of all to a woman who will speak trenchantly, I know, but who I am also honoured has been at times my own constituent.
Still is.
It still is. I didn't think you were. That's embarrassing. So can I please turn to Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell.
Thank you. So I'm the current president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Scotland's National Academy. And although the Royal Society of Edinburgh spans many, many intellectual areas, I'm actually a scientist myself. I want to take you back to February, March time this year when there was an excited announcement about on the 100th anniversary Einstein proved right. One wants to add again. This particular instance was the announcement of the direct detection of gravitational radiation from two black holes spiralling in together and colliding. The announcement was made in the USA and it was not as clear as it should have been that there was significant British involvement. The universities of Glasgow, Birmingham and Cardiff were the main British participants, and that there was also German and Italian involvement in that. British universities have played a major role in that international project, and certainly in Edinburgh we're working to make sure that the Scottish contingent gets the recognition it really should have. This is one example of many major international collaborations that the UK is part of. There are international academic networks, not just scientific ones, that are an alternative network to the political networks. And we probably haven't adequately recognised that point. And because of the current situation, one of the things that the Royal Society of Edinburgh is going to be doing is strengthening, reaffirming all the international connections that we have over the next couple of weeks. And the message will be that we still want these links, please. We want to continue doing business with you. And I hope that the other professional bodies represented here would consider doing likewise. But clearly from correspondence we are already receiving, the Brexit decision has shaken our international peers around the world. The letters are of sympathy and reassurance, and I'm surprised how promptly they're coming in. I think I don't need to say again that the UK has many international academics, outstanding ones. We do very well, but it's not all done by UK or even Little Englanders. We need the international academics, and what we should be continuing to aim to do is to have the best scientists in the world working here in Britain. So we need to reassure them that they're welcome. The visa system needs tweaking. We say this in this room each year. Maybe one day it will be. And students are currently counted in the immigration numbers, which seems a trifle crazy. I want to conclude with a comment about our Young Academy. The Royal Society of Edinburgh has a Young Academy, the Young Academy of Scotland. And I'm particularly proud of them at the moment because they have decided that in this year's intake of new membership, 10% of the places are being reserved for refugee and asylum seeker academics. If all these bodies represented here could do something similar, that would be a useful message that we send out on many, many fronts. So I issue that challenge to all the bodies represented here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we should all thank Dame Jocelyn for those points, but in particular for her message going out to all non-UK academics and researchers in the UK that they are indeed very welcome, and that the vote which we have just been through was in no way a message to you that we don't want you here. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Your value to the United Kingdom is ever more important to us right now as we try and find our way through this process and ensure that the UK science and innovation sector remains as strong as it always has been. I would like to now ask Carol Monaghan, who is a leading light on the Science and Technology Committee, to make her contribution. And I'd particularly like her to echo Dame Jocelyn's exemplary contribution, which was at 2 minutes and 55 seconds. I am timing. Go ahead.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Nicola. To say something about myself, first of all, I'm very much an accidental politician. I still consider myself to be a physics teacher, although other people refer to me as other things, probably best not mentioned at times. I came into politics because of the constitutional question of Scotland, and I certainly didn't imagine that I would be sitting here this morning after a Brexit vote, and that is certainly something none of us in Scotland imagined could happen. I still feel as though somebody has detonated an atomic bomb by accident and hasn't really thought about the consequences of it. I do want to say a little about Scotland before I move on, because the picture in Scotland is different. Sarah talked about, when you knock on doors that people are not like you. Well, when I knock doors in my constituency, people were like me. People in Scotland feel European, so there's a real anger just now in Scotland about what has happened. My constituency voted 69% to remain, so it is quite a difference. Scotland's also angry because during our own independence referendum we were told that if we voted yes, we would be kicked out of Europe. How ironic that is now. So, over the weekend, my mailbox has filled up with people who are appalled at the result, and many of them are scientists. My constituency sits very close to Glasgow University. Many of these are scientists, not just EU scientists, but international scientists who are working there. And many of these people just can't understand what has happened. Dame Jocelyn talked about the international collaborations and mentioned gravitational waves, and Glasgow University, of course, was one of the big players in that. But there are other collaborations. There's collaborations, the international collaborations looking at tropical diseases, looking at cancer research. All of these things, not only is it collaborations across Europe and across the world, but these impact worldwide, and it's very important that there is EU funding in these projects just now, that we need to work very hard in order to keep that. Scientists are acutely aware of how important funding from EU is, and I don't think scientists should simply be part of the negotiations, but we need to be fighting now to make sure that funding that the Leave campaign told us we could get easily, because we were paying all that money into Europe anyway. We need to make sure that that funding that was coming from Europe is coming from the government now, so that these collaborations can continue. I'm getting a nod from Nicola, so I'll close up at this point. I do want to say just one final point, something that hasn't been mentioned much. I am a teacher, still registered. That's not my time, can I say this?
I have power over the bell.
Yeah. Many of the students in our schools across the UK are EU students, and when you're looking at students, particularly pupils from Eastern Europe, they have a very different view of science and going into a scientific career than possibly UK nationals do. It's seen as highly prestigious. It's something that their parents want them to do. And that's actually a talent flow that potentially we could be losing here. So we need to work hard to make sure we are keeping these EU students in our schools and getting them into our universities. And I'll stop there, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Carol. And I will say that I share your pain because Oxford voted 70% for Remain.
You beat me.
Yeah. I took it seriously. Right, now, could I please turn to Dr. Stuart Pritchard. He's the EU Affairs Manager at the Wellcome Trust and has been responsible for the Trust's activities with EU institutions and building relationships with a wide range of EU stakeholders.
Thank you. I'm yet to find out if my job title is going to be renamed to Europe Affairs Manager, I'm afraid, but thank you for the invitation. I'm surrounded by scientists, I should confess. I'm a humble geographer, so we are a part of the scientific community as well. I think science and research obviously are a global enterprise. Wellcome Trust is a global charitable foundation. We work across the globe supporting the best science possible wherever it can thrive. Obviously, we are based in the UK and have a large presence here, but we now have all have a period of uncertainty to deal with. And even though the majority of the research community, as we've heard this morning, may have wanted a different result, I think you've heard from all of the panelists so far about the need to work together to ensure that we can continue both our collaborations here in the UK and in Europe and globally as well. We're committed to working with government, yourselves in the science and research community, to make sure that we address some of the challenges in the days ahead, the months ahead, some of the uncertainties that we've heard about. We'll be looking to ensure that science and research are as prominent as possible within the negotiations around our relationship with the EU, that the case for maintaining and growing science and research funding is as prominent as possible, and that we can facilitate international collaboration as much as possible. For the Trust, we are very keen to be aware of the global health challenges that we face, whether it's demographic change, responding to climate change, whether it's responding to epidemics such as the Ebola outbreak in West Africa or Zika that's enveloping parts of the world at the moment, or dealing with some of the challenges around climate change that are very pressing. So we must continue to collaborate with scientists and researchers in Europe and internationally to find solutions to these challenges. We have been hearing from scientists that we work with, that we're in contact with from across Europe. Some have coined what I hope doesn't remain a new term, which is regret, which would be a horrible addition to the language. But I think there is hope out there that the scientific community does recognise the value of what we do, does recognise that there is enormous value in the work of the UK science community, and they wish to continue to work with us, and we should work to ensure that, as everyone has said this morning, the UK demonstrates that it is still open for good science and good collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart, for doing your bit to get regret into the Oxford University Dictionary. But your point that it will be through international collaboration that we will be addressing the great global challenges, I think has got to be a core message that we're getting across to decision makers in the key parties, those who are standing for leadership, but also those who are leading the Brexit negotiations, because that's how we will get up the priority agenda. But can I finally turn to Dr. Robert Parker. He's the CEO of the Royal Society of Chemistry and has led that organisation with distinction. And I'm not going to give any more introduction now because I want to make sure that we have a lot of time for questions from the floor. Please.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm standing here really as a representative of lots of the learned and professional societies that are represented here, because I think we all represent the same thing in this debate, that science is a global endeavour and scientists are incredibly good at working together. We've got an overriding responsibility to collaborate internationally in order to make the world a better place for people to live in and to work on global challenges. We can all talk, as these sorts of organisations we represent, about European federations, international federations, bilateral things, ways in which we help to bring people together. But also, we have a massive responsibility to keep the UK science endeavour linked to all those places where science is going on across the world, and especially those places where science is growing at a tremendous rate. We've had a leadership role in science along with some other countries for many, many decades, and we really don't want to lose that leadership position. Scientists and science had a massively important role after the two world wars in the last century in bringing people together and showing that collaboration could be done in times of difficulty in political scenes or post-conflict turmoils. And I hope that the soft diplomacy that comes with science can be used again in order to smooth the waters after this result that we have had. Those sorts of collaborations have led to very important things. I'll mention just one or two. Organisations such as the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. You know, without scientists working together after the wars, we would not have that organisation, and we would not have international regulation or European-wide legislation on things like safety of chemicals, whether you like that legislation or not. The last thing that I really wanted to say was, in an environment where the country seems split along all sorts of lines, and where those who feel most marginalised are perhaps least likely to listen to us, even though, as Imran said in the previous one, there's a good trust in scientists. I don't think people listen to scientists through this debate. But I believe we have a massive responsibility to show leadership wherever we can, particularly in issues around diversity, inclusion and tolerance. We need to make a stand against the xenophobia and racism that has reared its ugly head in the past days. And I don't think any of us will have been immune from that. Even in our main office in Cambridge, which was a very strong Remain vote, we have had our staff told to go home when they've been walking through Cambridge in the last 2 days. And that actually makes me feel sick to my stomach. I think we need to show to our international collaborators that we are still absolutely worthy partners and friends in the endeavour of science to bring advancements in science for the benefit of humanity. Thank you.
I think those were incredibly wise words there, and I think that each and every one of us here today must surely share in the condemnation of each and every racist or xenophobic or intolerant act which has been committed by those who have mistaken the Brexit vote for any kind of allowance for their intolerant thoughts. It was not that. The vote to Brexit was simply a vote to leave the EU. It was in no way any kind of endorsement of any intolerant mindset. And each and every one of us here today, I think, have a responsibility to make sure that we step as hard as we can on any attitude like that, or any inkling of an attitude like that that we come across. I have found the same in my constituency, and I shall be doing what I can to try and root out this sort of attitude. And I hope that all of you here today will do whatever you can in your areas. But we now have 20 minutes for questions. I think that the best thing to do is to take 3 questions at once and allow the panel to respond to that. If I could, I'm going to continue my rule of iron and ask you to be as brief as the panel have been, and also to introduce yourselves so that we all know who we're talking to. Could I take this question here? Gentleman at the back, and Caleb Ghosh.
Hi, Peter Starring, University of Sheffield. So I have lots of collaborations with Europe, and I'm just about to go off to Brussels for a very big meeting, but also with the rest of the world. And I'm working on deals at the moment to bring North American investors to the UK to invest in our research. Now, the message I'm getting back is, why should we do that? Because we see Britain as a gateway to Europe. What messages can we give to international investors that were still open to investment? And also, how do we stop the migration of scientists over to North America and overseas? Because that, I can see that as being a very, very big problem that we need to face.
Thank you. Gentleman,
Caleb Ghosh from BBC News. My question is to Nicola principally, but if other panellists would like to chip in, then please do. In your rousing introductory remarks, you talked about a creative approach to the free movement of labour, one that would meet the needs of the scientific establishment, but also address the concerns of those that voted to leave. Could you elaborate on what that might be? Are you talking about a dispensation for the scientific community?
And the gentleman at the back.
Harry Swan from Thomas Swan & Company. I manage a chemical manufacturing SME up in the northeast of England. One of my key concerns about the vote last week is the impact it will have on Horizon 2020 funding, which we rely very heavily on. And I think the question I want is, it's not just necessarily the funding that's important from Horizon 2020 funding, it's actually the connectivity it gives you with key companies that, as an SME, it's quite difficult to access. And by having a funding that involves collaboration, it gives you access to those companies. So the lack of that 2020 funding in the future would have a big impact on us from that perspective. I'd just be interested to know the panel's opinions or thoughts on how we maintain that connectivity with big companies throughout the rest of Europe.
Okay. Would you like to start, Robert, and we'll go down the panel?
I'll start with, if I can say something about Peter Starring's comments, keeping people from the brain drain. It's something that's been on my mind as well the last couple of days. I think one of the great things that we have in the UK is a sceptical curiosity that is very valued by other scientists and people around the world, and they see the UK as leading in that sort of sceptical curiosity that keeps you innovative. And it's no shock that we've had so many Nobel Prizes in the UK as a result of that, I think. So I'll pass on to others for other answers, I think.
I think Horizon 2020 is one of several strands of funding that are now at risk. European Research Council, all sorts of things. And one has to hope, and we have to work to ensure that the government will increase the funding available through its resources. This has to be one of the first calls on the money they save by not being part of the European Union.
I think when we heard a lot during the referendum campaign about how powerful the university sector was, how strong the science base was, and how many of our the scientists were linked to the rest of the world. I think it's up to us to prove that that's still the case, despite all the difficulties. And I think I've worked in Brussels on a lot of different legislative dossiers, and one thing that we have got that I think is very strong is a very strong societal dialogue between the science community and government. That might not feel the case, particularly every time we're negotiating science funding as part of the CSR, but I think we have to keep faith that we have a strong base here and that we have a lot to build upon. We shouldn't lose hope. And there are going to be difficulties, and I think it's incumbent upon us all in the community to try and help to identify as quickly as possible what those barriers are and try and suggest measures that will try and reduce them. So if for example, it's in terms of keeping that connectivity with large companies, if we look at existing EU programs like the Innovative Medicines Initiative for the life sciences sector, that is one which allows associate member participation. How do we make sure that we maximise UK involvement in that? What are the things that we should try and do, the government should try and do, to try and make sure that that is continued and supported? It's not just funding, it's about how we make use of all of the tools that we have available to what is a world-leading global science base.
Carol?
I'm going to be far briefer. I think we've had Brexit and we've had the shock of that, and we've had a weekend of accusations and counter-accusations, and I think now what the international community and foreign investors need to see is strong government. They need to see clear signals coming out that the UK is open for business. They don't need to see party fighting. They don't need to see, not across parties, but within parties themselves. What they need to see now is that somebody hasn't hit the panic button and people are running about like headless chickens, and I'm afraid there's probably quite a few of them running about this place today. So what we need now is actually a calm, level head.
Yes, I agree with that. Peter, on your point, I think it's essential that we retain access to the single market. I think that will be a very important point, because that's how we remain a gateway to Europe. So, I mean, I think that's becoming a consensus amongst most of the leadership candidates. Achieving that will require various different concessions in terms of payments going back to the EU, and in terms of free movement. That still has to be played out. So who knows where that goes, but single market access has to be in there. So I would say that's how you address those issues at a high level. In terms of your points at the back, that not just the funding is important, but also the access. I think we shouldn't be too dismal about losing Horizon 2020 funding. Even in the Swiss example, where the Swiss voted to restrict free movement and they were suspended from access to Horizon 2020, they did manage to renegotiate access back in. It was on more restricted terms, but they did get back in. They didn't get back into Erasmus. They were able to. The risk is more that there will be a period when there might be a suspension and the Treasury might have to step in, and it's very important that that does happen. And that there is a seamless transition from whatever we have now to whatever happens next, and that there isn't any dip in the level of inequality. And in terms of the collaboration and the IP and access to research institutes, all of that has to be negotiated, and we have to work out whether it will be along a Norwegian model or a Swiss model or a Canadian or an Israeli model. And clearly we have to fight for the greatest access, the greatest collaboration, the greatest IP rights that we possibly can, and this needs to be at the top level priority for the negotiating team, because our science and innovation ecosystem is essential to the success of our economy, and that is the bottom line. And Palab, you were asking about migration. I can't give you a migration policy that will solve all the problems of the nation. We've been trying to do that for several years. What I can say is student numbers should be taken out of the migration figures. I have been on several committees that have recommended that, and I think that that is extremely important for the science and innovation sector. And it is only common sense. The second thing I would say is there have been some very sensible recommendations that have come out from Bright Blue on migration that would create sort of a community levy for areas which are particularly affected by immigration. They can put forward proposals for local investment. And I think that that offsets some of the concern about the local impact of immigration. And in terms of the science and innovation community, of course, we need to have a much more responsive skills shortage analysis and a shorter turnaround of the visa programme, because it often doesn't work for academic recruitment and also for the startup recruitment cycle. It's just a bit too long process. So there's areas that can be improved there, but I can't claim that I could fix the migration system, otherwise I would be the Prime Minister by now. All right, can we have 3 more questions, please? One here, one there, and a lady here.
Oh, stand up. Oh, okay. Alex Halliday, Royal Society and Oxford University. I've been trying to think what we might be able to do that would create a positive impact in terms of a message we might want to send to the world, given what's happened. And the one thing I thought of, which I'd like to hear what the panel thought, of course they've already given some great ideas. If you look at the way we treat international students, and in particular through RC UK funding at the moment, we do prioritise British students, and actually there is some fraction of the funding that can go towards EU students as well, so they get a partial, if you like, reimbursement. I wonder if we might want to change that. America's completely different. They don't care where you come from. They basically bring the best in the world to America. Switzerland's exactly the same. It just brings in the best in the world to try and come and study in their country. And I wonder whether it might send a very positive message that we could have some control over if we said to the world, we want the best in the world to come to the UK.
I think we had a question over here. Yeah, this lady here.
Hello, my name's Heather and I'm from the Microbiology Society and I sit on the Career Development team and I'm also a PhD student. And I was wondering what the panel can say to many young people like myself who are very worried about our futures and our opportunities and are actually thinking of leaving the country.
And one more question, there was one over here, this lady here.
Hi, my name is Myris. I'm actually a graduate chemical engineer working at GlaxoSmithKline. Our collaborative work across the UK and with the EU countries are very important for our work in delivering life-saving medicines. I understand that there's been a lot of news for a second independence referendum for Scotland. Whilst we understand the majority of Scotland voted to remain inside the EU, isn't this a more vital time to counter division within the UK rather than become divided, as is important for collaborative work collaborative work with EU countries and across the UK is important for the success of our innovation and research.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Carol, would you like to answer that question?
I'm happy to start. To take that one, first of all, I mean, in terms of countering division, we can have division in many different lines. We can have divisions in socio-economic, we can have divisions geographically, we can have divisions racially or culturally. Division exists, it's how we work with that division. In terms of Scotland and the EU, Scotland sent a very clear signal that they wanted to remain. People in Scotland feel European, they don't feel the threat that is felt by people in some other parts of the UK. And we now have a situation where Scotland could be democratic, could have a democratic choice by the Scottish people could be overturned by people in the rest of the United Kingdom. So we now have a division. We have a division in terms of thought. And first and foremost, Scottish elected representatives, certainly from my party, will be working for the good of the people that we are served to elect. And that's absolutely bottom line. And if that means that requires a second independence referendum in order to preserve our place in Europe, then that may be what's required. I know that is not what we wanted during our first referendum. We wanted to be part of Europe, we wanted independence, but we thought that our closest neighbours and friends would also be part of Europe, and unfortunately that is not looking like the case. So yeah, there is certainly, it is now on the table that there could be a second independence referendum, and I think we'll see very definitely it being played out in terms of European citizenship and being part of a wider family in that regard, rather than being part of a family that's, I suppose, chosen to take a different path to us.
Stuart.
I'll leave the Scottish issue maybe, but I think in terms of the question about young people and also relating a little bit to best in the world, I think it's easy to despair after last week, particularly if you're a younger voter or a younger scientist. I don't want to have glib phrases thrown around, but nothing is stopping for the moment. And there's nothing to say that participation in Erasmus or other programs is going to stop. It would be naive to expect that to continue without some additional complexity. But I think you have to have faith that the UK has a very strong science base and a very strong reputation. And we have strong scientists, strong researchers. We've got to try and push to ensure that we both remain open to the outside world, but also that we remain open to moving to other parts of the world, including within the European Union and outside. And I think we have to push to ensure that barriers to participation of young people are minimised in the negotiation so that we can continue to have people. I worked in Brussels for 7 years. I had a phenomenal time. It was a huge part of my career. So I thoroughly encourage people to try and still do that.
Thank you. Dame Jocelyn, would you like to address any of those issues, and also Alex's points, which haven't been picked up yet?
I think the main thing I want to say is, I guess a lot of people in this room are trained scientists, and we're trained to be fiercely logical, and we think in terms of either or. I come originally from Northern Ireland, and in Northern Ireland there's an interesting duality. Maybe we need to think a bit along these sorts of lines in the UK. The Republic of Ireland still recognises Northern Ireland as part of Ireland. And indeed there's a sudden rush for Irish passports, I understand. Northern Irish people, in terms of sport, for example, can choose whether they are British or Irish. And it's not a lifetime choice. You could flip or flop if you wanted to. And it's actually a no-brainer, that choice. I mean, you've got a much better chance of getting onto an Olympic team if you declare yourself to be Irish rather than British. But there is that kind of option. And I hope we won't restrict our thinking too rigorously to either-or options, because there may be other slightly more flexible ways of doing things. Maybe not at the ultimate legal level, but in terms of practice, living, life. That's the most important thing I want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. In terms of Alex's comment, I agree. I think we have to do anything we can to come up with messages that make it look as if the UK is still open for business, for science and everything else. On Heather's comment, I think, again, it's about ensuring that the UK is a great place to do science and have a job in science when you've done with university or whatever after that, or whatever training you do. There are lots of aspects to that. There are cultural aspects, there are funding aspects, they've all been mentioned today, and also job opportunities. And all those things are going to be very uncertain at the moment, and particularly there's an uncertainty with some of the companies that are not headquartered in the UK that might make a horrible decision to move out of the UK, and we have again a responsibility to work with them to prove that in terms of innovation and skills and supply of excellent people, that we are the place that they want to be working to give the young people the opportunities that they want and deserve. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Right, we have 1 minute, so I'm afraid we're going to have to finish this session. I want to thank all of you for your questions, and I want to thank the panel for really thought-provoking and important comments. When it comes down to it, the messages which have come out from today have been, we mustn't lose the soft power and diplomatic value of our scientists. We must send out the message loud and clear to the international community that the UK is still a science superpower, that we are open for business. And we must remember that we, as the scientific community, have a responsibility to lead, a responsibility to make it clear to non-UK academics here that they are welcome, and that we utterly condemn any messages going out to them at the moment that they are not. Thank you very much.